Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Kyle Seraphin Show. Today is Wednesday. It is September the 10th, and I appreciate you joining us for the program. I want to talk about trust and the lack thereof in this country. We have moved from maybe a high trust society in many ways to a low trust society, and I think that in many ways now we are in a post-trust society. I'm not confident that we can earn it back. I had a post the other day that I firmly believe, and I put this out on social media, and of course you get some pushback on it, but I think a lot of people understand what I'm saying. I don't like the idea that we have to pretend that we were going to vote our way out of this situation in this nation. And I also don't like the idea that people think we did. And so for those of us that kind of sit in the middle, I had a very interesting discussion with a former guest of ours named Amy Nelson, who I think is a wonderful person. And we probably came from very different places politically to get together and say that we're both post-partisan. I'm not bipartisan. I'm not apartisan. I'm post-partisan. I don't believe that the parties do anything. I don't think that they are representing anybody's perspective. And from the people that I talk to, human beings are very nuanced. And it's really, really rare that I find someone that says that actually understands what's going on. I 100% sign on for all the planks or tenets that this political party represents. I got to sit in on a Twitter space yesterday. There was like 30 people in it. It was disastrously low attendance. And it was the Texas GOP and a committee woman hosting a discussion with a prospective state representative in the state of Texas. And he went on to talk about the ongoing issue, even in a red state like Texas, where the primary system is one of the weapons that the party uses to eliminate any dissent or any new ideas or anyone that's going to challenge the status quo. Now, we've heard that before. We heard that in Florida as well. And so it's not foreign to me. But what I didn't realize with the messaging that came down, and it is partisan messaging, and it stated essentially that we need solidarity. We need to come together and support the incumbent candidate against challengers from the outside during the primary. When in reality, if we were a group of people that were looking for truth and the best answers for all things, what we would say is we want to accept anybody who has an idea, and we want to debate that idea on the merits during the primary system. And since we don't see that, and the establishment gets behind, whatever their normal candidate is, because that's a known quantity, that is the status quo, they throw all the money and the influence and the party mechanisms behind it, you don't ever get anyone to challenge it. And that means that I'm beyond the ability to trust that system. I'm post-partisan. I can't look at a system and say, oh, it actually actively avoids good answers or new answers or challenging answers. And therefore what? I'm going to get behind him and say, yeah, rah, rah. This is why I'm never going to see, a political party represent my perspective. And I don't think many of us do either. If we're being totally honest, if you were to evaluate the candidates in front of you, do they represent you? The only ones that might are the ones that are the closest to you, which, by the way, was the way our system was designed. I think it's broken dramatically. And we didn't vote our way out of this in November of 2024. And that's really something that's hard for people to accept. And it makes you look like you're some sort of down, mopey, black pillar, someone who's selling doom and gloom. It's not doom and gloom. Actually, I think it's actually liberating to say that national politics in this country actually probably can't be saved. Not in the way that you thought. You can't just go out and vote in a general election and then find some turnaround. And for all the executive orders that are being signed under the Trump administration, and they just capped over 200 of them. That was something we talked about yesterday. 200 executive orders. They can be flipped like a light switch on the first day of the next party's occupation of that job. So there's no solution there. That's a ping pong ball that gets knocked around. What that means is that I want to start looking more into local politics on my personal end, and I hope you guys are doing the same thing. This is obviously the same thing that we talked about in November, that you weren't going to solve it. You should know who your local candidates are. We can observe more and more reasons why we must devolve to the lowest levels, state and local government. We can still talk about the problems nationally, and then they should be addressed locally. So I think that's what we're going to try to do today a little bit. And I'm going to present an argument for you right up front. This is an argument made by a guy named Andrew Branca. I was on some kind of a podcast with him with Ron Coleman on an election night. And so I was introduced to him at that point in time. He has a pretty good sized YouTube channel as well, so you guys may be familiar with him as well, talking about trust. And so he's going to talk about, I think, cultural and economic trust. I'm going to address the following claims during this podcast. We're going to talk about institutional trust, to include things like public health, primarily public health in this case for institutions, which also covers down on education and science and some other things. We're going to talk about media trust, which I think we all agree is at an all-time low. All the studies say as much, and why that would be. We're going to discuss things like governmental trust, another institution, and governmental specifically about what should be apolitical stats, just gathering numbers and telling people this is something. These are the number of dollars that were spent. These are the number of jobs that were created. This is the amount of inflation that we've observed. Things like that can't even be without a political lean. And so they've destroyed the trust in that. And all of that gets to a broader concept of, if you don't know who the problem is, if you are unable to articulate who are the movers that are manipulating behind the scenes to make you not have any trust, then you don't trust anybody. And in a post-trust society, what do we do with it? Donald Trump actually had the answer to it, so I'll probably lead with that as well. But before we get into any of this sort of heavier topics for a Wednesday, it's the middle of the week. We can handle a little bit of a burden, right? Let's start off with our friends over at Patriot Coolers. Again, they are wonderful folks that make a great product if you are so inclined. And we used them yet again yesterday. My wife does this thing called the Azure Drop. Some of you guys know it's like the grocery store goes to a parking lot, then you go pick up all your groceries there. So you get 25-pound bags of flour and grain and stuff like that. And they always have frozen goods that my wife gets, and we end up putting them in our Patriot Cooler. It's the easiest way to do it because it comes right off a semi in the frozen section. It's already thawing out in the hot Texas sun. We immediately throw it back in to our 50-quart Patriot Cooler, which sits in the back of the minivan at all times. You guys can get your own at patriotcoolers.com. Promo code KYLE saves you 10%. Maybe you want to get one engraved like this one. I've been using this all the time because it's still pretty freaking hot here in Texas. This is 40 ounces of ice and water, and I just usually load that up because I don't trust my kids to take their own water bottles. Tote it with me when we go to the playgrounds, when we go out and do anything outdoors. If we go for a bike ride, I just bring my own 40 ounces, keep it in the back of the car. When we get there and their water bottles are empty, it's like, boom, there we go. Now we'll recharge you guys. Keep it cool. Keep people from avoiding heat stroke. I guess you could put 40 ounces of coffee in there if you were a complete savage. That's the kind of thing I used to do when I was working in the surveillance world. Anyway, check them out, patriotcoolers.com, promo code KYLE. There's a link in the show description if you guys want to see the engraved options. And we're going to get into today's program starting now. All right, little pull from the water bottle there. And so let's talk about it. Again, I gave you the answer at the end of yesterday's show, and I'm going to do it at the beginning of today's show. And I think the answer actually is the same answer that we got in the book of Judges. If you look at times of human trial, the answer to low trust or post-trust societies is always trusting not in human beings. It's saying institutions of men inevitably will let you down. And it doesn't matter whether you have a government that you think is inspired, it oftentimes will be led astray. Even if you have a good and worldly king, and we do sort of do this thing where we now believe that our president is sort of a regal figure that will come in and bestow rain upon the parched wastelands, and will go out there and stop crime and subvert human nature, which is full of mental illness and anger and frustration. Like, that's not how it works. But we can act like it for a little while, only until we're exposed to the true reality that doesn't solve it. And it never does. And so for all those people that are out there and doing it in sort of a trolling manner, they post these on social media, Christ is King. I wonder how many of them have actually considered that, because a lot of them put MAGA out in their profile too. And if you ask them a couple of questions, they would tell you that Donald Trump is the solution, even though they have the evidence right in front of them in their own statement that says otherwise. You're not going to find an earthly king that wins. That's essentially the message that the New Testament brings to us. And that the only way that you were going to get a king that was going to solve the problems had to be both man and God, hence Christ as king. I think that's the argument. I think Donald Trump is almost there. And he said it the other day, and I really like the message in so much as it is something that is not without hope. If you guys remember the movie The Matrix, which I found to be kind of formative in my youth, it's a story all about it's all about salvation. It's all about the coming of Christ and bringing someone who is going to take humanity from darkness into light. But if you recall, there was this moment where this character Morpheus, this sort of prophet character, goes out there and he holds out the two pills, right? The blue pill and the red pill. And so many people have talked about it in a post Matrix civilization. In the last 25 years, it's been sort of a common expression. To be red-pilled is to quote unquote see things as they are. Isn't it interesting that seeing things as they are is unbelievably depressing, right? There's the Matrix version of it, which is that glossed over if you're living asleep and you're plugged in and they're taking the body heat out of you or whatever the heck the story was, right? It was draining human beings for their bioenergy. They were a little human battery system. And they were walking around in this imperfect universe that was a creation of their mind and an architect and all this other kind of stuff. And then you take the red pill and you wake up into reality. And reality is brutal and harsh and nasty and lethal and scary and dangerous and full of lightning strikes and so on. So waking up doesn't feel good. And amusingly enough, I think a lot of people use the term red-pilled like they suddenly understand how things are going on. Oh, it's not good though. That's the real answer. To be red-pilled, to be awake, to be alert to the situation is to go, yeah, this is not a winner. We're not living in a great reality, but that means that you don't necessarily have to win if you actually believe in that thing that I see a lot of people sort of, like I said, put in a troll manner and they say Christ is king. Have they really thought it through that it actually is sort of like acknowledging that suffering is probably the name of the game and that loss on earth was the win? Anyway, here's Donald Trump. Again, this is the right focus. I'm not even sure if Donald Trump realizes that, maybe taking this out of context is not fair to his perspective watching it, but I'd like to believe it is. And I think a lot of people can look at this and go, okay, got it. Even if the messenger is quite imperfect, and even if the messenger didn't even understand how important the message is, this is still it.
So let's bring religion back. Let's bring God back into our lives. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Great honor. Thank you.
All right. So let me make the argument opening up. And this is, again, I led to it earlier on. It's Andrew Branca. He has this program. This is a little short talking about trust. And this is going to go into the broader context of discussing trust and the lack thereof. And then I've got like maybe, 5 or 6, maybe 7 news stories here that I think illustrate that, all coming from major publications. So there's a CNN story, there's an NBC story, there's an MSNBC story, ABC, New York Times has a good one, and then also CBS. So all of the major media outlets are actually talking about trust or lack thereof, whether they actually intended that or not. Again, sometimes we see these themes running through news threads, and I pulled the ones that I thought were the most salient. There's also a bunch of other things that are being discussed right now that I think are distractionary at the top of all these pages. So let me start with this little short. Let's evaluate the concept of what he talks about, high trust or low trust, and then I'm going to make the argument for post-trust.
Folks, it's like we've all driven around the countryside at one point or another, right? And you go past a little farm and they'll have a table or they'll have a shed. And there's a bunch of corn and tomatoes and cucumbers and melons in the shed for sale. And there's nobody manning the shed. They have a little sign up that gives the price for the items, and they have a box you can put the money in. And there's not much to keep anyone from stealing the money out of the box, much less taking the produce and not paying for it. In a high-trust society, that works. In a low-trust society, they rob you blind. They think they'd be an idiot not to just steal all this stuff. That's the difference between a high trust and a low trust society. In a high trust society, your kid can ride his bike to the convenience store and lean it against the wall and go inside and buy a candy bar and have some expectation the bicycle will still be there, unlocked, when he comes back out. In a low trust society, the thieves figure out how to break every bike lock, so even having a lock becomes pointless. And whether your society is high trust or low trust, I was going to say it's a matter of choice. I don't really think low trust societies can become high trust, but I think high trust societies can be degraded into low trust societies. And that's what happens to America when you import tens of millions of low trust cultural third world migrants into a high trust society. They rob you blind.
All right, I'm watching the chat as this is playing right now, and our live chat is discussing that many of you live in areas where this is a reality, where there are, in fact, these farm stands, and I've seen them in places that are blue-ish, right? Like what we would call blue areas or Democrat voting areas. They existed in Hawaii when I was there. If you go into small areas, oftentimes what it comes down to is population density, and it also comes down to sort of cultural homogeneity, and if that's something that is accepted. There's places in Connecticut that I've seen this. My mother-in-law's little town has these little stands. They'll just leave out several dozen eggs from the morning, from the morning harvest of it. And they'll go into their chicken coops and they'll pull them all out and they'll set them out on the farm stand. And throughout the day, people will come in and put money into a jar and take fresh eggs from this little farm that's on the side of the road. So that's a thing. It can happen in blue areas. It can happen in red areas. It's not unique to politics. But what it does seem to be unique to is that it only happens in small little regional areas. It doesn't happen on a national scale. So for all of you that are experiencing these little oases, I think they are more common than Americans would think, but not for the vast majority of our population. All right. The first story I want to talk about is from CNN. I thought this was quite interesting. And this is the degrading of what should be apolitical. Simply put, numbers that our government calculates in order for it to do its job. And what we found is, because we live now in a low trust or even a post-trust society, we can't even get numbers to be without some sort of an agenda. The headline goes, massive job revisions are a stain on Joe Biden's legacy too. Oh, they put the word "to" in there because they also mean that it's also a stain on Donald Trump's legacy or on Donald Trump's current work. Quite interesting. The past 2 months of job reports and a slew of recent employment data have made it clear that America's labor markets have been substantially weakened. Remember, this was also on the heels of yesterday's story talking about how black women are a bellwether for employment in the United States. I don't think that's true. I don't know why someone would make that argument. I don't understand why somebody would get out there and be a congresswoman like Ayanna Pressley and try to make that point to people, but to highlight things about race because that's what she does. Many of President Donald Trump's critics have leveraged data. So this is why it's partisan, because you have critics using the data to claim that it's all his fault by imposing unprecedented tariffs and strict immigration enforcement operations that have slowed down an otherwise healthy economy. And although Trump's policies may have contributed to some of these dismal employment data in years, some of the most dismal employment data in years, under his watch, he may not be as blame deserving as his critics have stated. He's still to blame, of course. This is CNN, of course, so we can't just ignore. But what we are going to also say is that, as it turns out, the labor market inherited from former President Joe Biden was not as solid as the economists thought before Tuesday, when the Bureau of Labor Statistics released its preliminary annual benchmark revisions between April of 2024 and March of 2025. And during that year, over that time frame, the Bureau of Labor Statistics said 911 fewer jobs were added compared to prior estimates. So they rush a number to press, and it seems to have a partisan meaning. We're doing a great job. We've added 1 million new jobs to the economy. Look how awesome we are. Look how great we've done. And then quietly they go back and they do the revision. This is the same thing as putting a slanderous and salacious headline up front and then doing the retraction and the correction, on page 8. Headline on the front page, Joe Biden adds tons of jobs. Retraction, page 8, a year later. Joe Biden economy not quite as good as we originally intended. And then you end up having people try to parrot that mouthpiece information. They want to go out there and say, yeah, like Joe Biden did a great job. And look how terrible Trump is because of these things. When in reality, we should be looking at this group called the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Of course, Donald Trump sort of famously fired people that were involved in some of these statistical claims, and rightly so. But did that solve the problem that you actually have a partisan goal with numbers that should just be math, simple math, not racist white supremacist math, as some people on the left might want to make it? It's just an estimate that shouldn't have any. And shouldn't you always err on the low end? Unless you're getting political pressure to make someone look good and someone not. Here is our Treasury Secretary having a discussion on Meet the Press, which is obviously quite left-leaning on NBC, and he's pushing back about the claims that are being made. All of this is a degrading of trust. Even the fact that you have to have this argument says that we can't even trust simple numbers that our government should do, which shouldn't have anything to do with anybody. They're just either factually true or they're not. And if they're not, then why aren't they?
Mr. Secretary, the economy did add nearly 500,000 manufacturing jobs under former President Biden. In this case, since April, again, you're actually losing manufacturing jobs. Is that problematic for your policy?
Well, a couple of things, Chris. We're going to get the revisions for last year next week, and there may be as big as an 800,000 job downward revision. Again, this would be the second downward revision, so I'm not sure what these people who collect the data have been doing. It's good. We need good data. Secondly, what we are seeing is the jobs that are being created are going to either native-born or legal Americans. Most of the jobs created under the Biden administration, they went to illegal aliens.
Well, and I think that there would be a lot of debate over the fact that they went to illegal aliens. But let's keep moving.
No. That's the fact.
Okay. And is there evidence to say that? Yeah, there's certainly some anecdotal data points that pop up. We talked about a Hyundai factory the other day in the Carolinas, right? And they had 450 people that were being arrested and carried off. What I sometimes gain from the comments is looking at the problem in ways that I hadn't previously done. One of our commenters, and you know who you are, stated that was likely only one shift. And if there are 1,200 plus people working at that factory, and that was the claim that the news article actually made, 1,200 plus people, then you would imagine that roughly 400-ish people would be on each shift. And there are 3 shifts if you are running a 24/7 operation. So they came in for an 8 a.m. or a 9 a.m., knock and raid to go pull people off that were here illegally. And that may only have been one shift, to the point where you could have the majority of those 1,200 people working illegally. And by the way, they were not Hispanic workers, which is often the case when you think about ICE raids. These were mostly, it seemed like, Korean workers. So Donald Trump went on to say things about, hey, you can send your high intelligence and your high capabilities. You can bring your high skilled workers in and you can sponsor visas here. And we're more than happy to have, a movement in of high capabilities and people that are going to be part of our society and that want to add something of value, particularly if they have an intellectual capability. But what you can't do is you can't bring in illegals that are going to work for cheaper, and they're going to work in substandard conditions that Americans wouldn't accept and that we wouldn't otherwise allow. Kind of interesting to consider that as many as all of those workers could have been illegal for all we know. They just grabbed one shift of it. And so the Treasury Secretary, they're talking about how many of these jobs were in fact people who had no right to work in this country at all. That means that the companies that are hiring them are in violation of U.S. law, and obviously also the people are. And odds are they're finding a workaround there, which means they're either stealing somebody's identity, which we've talked about, the E-Verify system, not functional, and so on. So you got to gaslight the people. You have to. And that's how you end up with this story. Now, I'm not a huge Mike Johnson fan. As you guys know, from the minute he was named, I didn't think it was great. I was a big fan of no one for speaker, because if you don't have anybody in the speaker's chair, then they don't pass any of these bloated appropriations bills. And we don't have to even be lied to in the first place that we're going to get single issue appropriation funding. That never happened. That was the entire reason why Mike Johnson was supposed to be there. And he's supposed to be this liberty oriented Christian man from Louisiana. And he's got kind of a Smithersy little way of talking about it. And everything he says sounds quite good. And he's so reasonable. Right up until the point where he says, FISA is a necessary evil, that we have to have it, and that we're pro FISA now. Remember, he walked into a skiff, comes out, and suddenly he doesn't want to be the guy that goes up against FISA 702. We know that we're going to already get another continuing resolution because that's what Congress does. We're looking at the end of the fiscal year coming up, and they'll just do what they always do. They kick the can for a little bit until you forget about it. And then Smithers is going to introduce whatever the big funding package is, another omnibus. We were told no more of that. Obviously, that didn't happen. But it doesn't mean that they can't gaslight about what this guy is talking about. So this is an NBC story. We've got CNN and this is MSNBC. Mike Johnson has tried to sell Americans on the benefits of being occupied. The speaker believes that Chicagoans should bend the knee to the president who's promising aggression in the city. He says if you don't believe that, then you're not fully American. I don't think that's exactly what he said, actually. Speaker Mike Johnson on Tuesday told Democratic mayors who run cities that Donald Trump is threatening with troops to stop resisting. Yield, man, said Johnson, Republican, Louisiana. Let the troops come to your city and show how crime can be reduced. It's a morale boost for the country, and it's safe and it's a right for everybody to be involved. Okay. They make an analogy here from 22 years ago when Dick Cheney said that U.S. troops invading Iraq would be greeted as liberators. I think those of you who went there had various different experiences of that particular that particular welcoming. We've heard Republicans make preposterous claims that a people, in this case, American people, would welcome a U.S. military occupation. Well, here's the facts. People do when things are bad enough. But why wouldn't they? We're talking about going into Democrat-run areas where Democrats, who by and large believe that government is the answer to the problems, and if things are bad enough, it turns out this whole sort of Cloward Piven discussion that we've had for the last couple of years, if you overwhelm the local system, then people look around and they go, yeah, I think the answer might be a federal solution, whatever that is. Oh, the National Guard? Great. There's a big problem with that, though, because what happens when you invite National Guard troops that the entire American population is going to have to fund out of our vast coffers? Then what happens when they get something under control? Let's say they do a decent job of it and they end up, sort of lowering crime locally. Are you going to have the same police force that failed before step back up and take it over? You can't be there forever. We've proved that. You can't permanently occupy Chicago with a National Guard. At some point, you're going to have to realize that the problem is not simply an institution issue. It's not a government issue. It's not going to be a political solution to it. It's not that if you just had the right criminal justice system that we could get it done right. It's that you have a cultural problem where people are okay with violence and taking things from others. But you can gaslight during the meantime, and you can act like what's going to happen is if you brought in a bunch of National Guard troops, or if you brought in a bunch of ICE agents to go in and reduce the number of people here illegally, many of whom are involved in crime, whether they're victims of crime or whether they're perpetrating it, like, I don't want a captive victim population, and I certainly don't want a bunch of predators. The left-wing argument that I use regularly for people when they talk about illegal immigration in some sort of favorable way, and they think it's just or righteous or it's compassionate and it's humanitarian, it's not. Having seen it directly outside of Washington, D.C., which in theory should be one of the most lawful places in the United States, which would make it one of the most lawful places in the world. And it's not. You can go within walking distance of Washington, D.C. You could walk from the Capitol. In under a day, you could walk to a place where it is completely run by MS-13 guys. At least it was when I was working there. You'd bring in, let's just give an example, 100 illegal aliens, and we brought in millions of these people. Of that 100, you only need one of them to be predatory, that's willing to kill and maim and destroy families and individuals that has nothing to lose. And they will extort under the threat of violence from every single one of the 99. And they live like a king. They now have 99 people that work for them that pay them $20 a day or $20 a week. Small little businesses that are getting extorted for small little amounts. But that adds up on a weekly basis times 52, times 99. Start doing those numbers. You realize that that's a six-figure income from just being the bully and the gangster that controls all those folks. Now they are in a place that they have no access to law enforcement. They have no recourse to culture. They don't understand the language. And they've got the same problems they had where they started, except they're worse off. They don't even know the rules that exist in the United States. And then every once in a while, that guy who's at the top of the chain, he ends up killing somebody, throws their body in the park, and we find it a couple years later, and there's nothing we can do about it. And everybody lives in fear. They left one crappy third world nation. They came to the United States seeking freedom and hope. This is the liberal dream. This is what the left has wanted. They get here, and then they're abused, and they're taken advantage of. And there's nothing we can do about it. So the solution might have to be pretty drastic and aggressive. If you say that, though, then you're invading and you're stopping people's First Amendment liberties. You're somehow doing something awful because you're parking on a public street outside of a church. This is an interaction between the quote-unquote border czar. This is Tom Homan talking to Mika Brzezinski, who's making an argument illogically about parking spaces being the thing that is a threat. And I think he sets her straight. So a lot of people thought this was a nice little back and forth here, in so much as it's a little bit closer to the truth.
I see on the show this morning you have Governor Healy talking about ICE doing enforcement operations at a church. Mm-hmm. False. Didn't happen.
They were parked there.
And,
they did not do an operation there. She said they were parked in a public space legally.
But to say that and to push that out there puts fear in the immigrant community. So let me tell you what's happening.
That puts fear in the community.
Right.
To park the ICE agent's vehicle
they're on a
near
public
a church.
Street.
They
are
are
on a public street.
She said
they're on a public street
sir.
waiting to respond to a criminal alien release pulled aside the road. Let me tell you, in the last couple of days, what's happened in Boston. They've arrested Victor Gomez Perez, a 33-year-old criminal alien from Guatemala, with charges of aggravated rape, assault and battery with dangerous weapon, indecent assault and battery on a victim 14 years or younger. They arrested Kaylee Espinosa, a 33-year-old criminal alien from Colombia, with charges of aggravated assault on a pregnant victim. They arrested Joshua Gonzalez, a 24-year-old criminal alien from Dominican Republic, with charges for trafficking heroin, morphine, opium, resisting police, disorderly conduct, and drug distribution. They also arrested Samuel Armando Barrero, a 20-year-old criminal illegal alien from Guatemala, pending charges for assault and battery on a child. So Mayor Wu and Governor Healy, they ought to be calling ICE and thanking them for making their streets safer, for protecting their communities and taking these people off the street. They've turned a blind eye to this. They're sanctuary cities. Sanctuaries, cities and sanctuary states are sanctuaries for criminals. Give ICE access to the jail to arrest a bad guy in the jail rather than have to go in the community to find them. Because when you go in the community and find them, it puts ICE officers at greater risk. It puts the community at greater risk. It puts the alien at greater risk because anything can happen on a street arrest. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to prioritize public safety threats. When you got governors and mayors who are releasing these public safety threats every day into the community, that causes the crime rate, and we've seen some terrible incidents in the last few days where innocent victims are murdered. This past year, I've seen innocent Americans raped and murdered by people who are not supposed to be here. So
that seems like a really straightforward answer. And Tom Homan's one of those guys that I think fits into the sort of higher trust category. And the reason is because what does he have to gain? He's already got a retirement. He's not out there looking for media attention per se. I don't think he necessarily enjoys it. He's not the most eloquent of speakers, although his message is quite strong. It's clearly passionate. You know, he's like the kind of guys that you thought were working for Border Patrol that actually wanted to do the mission. It's not about animus. It's not about hatred of something else, although that is how it is often spun. So we're going to cover some of that and what the spin looks like in 1 second. Yes, all of you who are watching Mika Brzezinski's face, it is frustrating to watch. It's obviously very smug, but they don't know what to say. And if you look at her male co-host that was sitting in there and standing in for Joe Scarborough, he's just like, whoa. What do you even say when someone brings to you the facts of the types of people that they were arresting? And yes, the siren in the background is pretty perfect when you're doing a stand-up on the street and you're living in a place where sirens are nonstop. That is only a thing that you experience when you are in an urban area in America. You don't see that in rural areas. It's very uncommon when a police or an ambulance siren goes by in rural communities. Everybody looks up because nobody expects it. It's not common. But in urban areas, it's just part of the background soundscape. So for whatever that's worth. All right. Speaking of being in urban areas, speaking of people noticing what's going on, we can talk about how the fact that all of you are carrying a tracking device in your pocket. Yes, maybe you're using it to call 911, or maybe you're just being tracked by government agencies and big tech and corporate data brokers and cyber criminals and the like, because you have a constant and pervasive digital footprint. In the FBI, when we were doing surveillance, we referred to it as ubiquitous technical surveillance because you were all putting out significant numbers of signals every single day. If you want to shut them down, which you can, if you want to have a little bit of peace of mind, if you want silence, you can check out my friends at Silent. It's slnt.com/Kyle. Their Faraday products are blocking all the wireless signals that come out of your phone, and you guys can test them yourself. It's quite easy to do. You can connect things to cellular, to Wi-Fi, to Bluetooth, to GPS, to RFID, to near-field communications. All of those things do not penetrate their signal blocking technology sleeves and their backpacks and their other bags. And that means you get to be in control of your own signal. If you guys want to do that, it's slnt.com/KYLE. Save yourself 15% on any of your orders. You'll get free shipping on qualified orders. They by no means are the cheapest option because their options actually work. There's an opportunity to buy something cheaper, and you will find that they almost all have leaks. And I know that because I used to test them. We would buy them with government funds and find out that the Chinesium stuff was not nearly as good as someone who actually cares about their product, and it does cost a little bit more to do it. If you want no breadcrumbs, if you want no remote access to your information, if you want no tracking on your cell phones, the same technology that special operations and intelligence professionals use all over the world, you guys can buy it. It's accessible to you. It's in a very nice form factor, easy to use. Check out the E3 Everyday Backpack, which is something I have right there. It's my favorite travel bag right now, and it's very well laid out. It's thoughtful. It has really cool, smart designs, like even the buckle in the chest is magnetic and snaps into place when you have one-hand operation. Anyway, slnt.com/KYLE. Save yourself 15% on any of their products. And everything that I've used so far, and I've probably got about 6 of their products in this room alone, they all work great. There's a reason why they have military contracts for people that have sort of no-fail missions with millions of dollars of technology at risk. We're going to continue pushing onward with the argument that Mika is essentially making, which is that you're kind of a racist. Yeah, if you want to go out there and enforce laws, if you want to go out there and try to establish a higher trust, I don't think you can do high trust at a nation that is now in a low trust moment, but locally you can come in and you can change that. And that's the same sort of argument that I would make as you see people in the chat saying, hey, in my area, we actually have that. We have people that will do roadside stands. In our area, you can have an honor system based transaction when it comes to buying produce or goods. You don't have to have an ironclad contract or someone with all the deodorant hiding behind a glass door just to take a $3 product down, because you're going to lose everything from what they call shrinkage. Isn't it funny? They call it shrinkage. What they mean to say is loss due to theft. Shrinkage is the industry term for it. And if you notice that there is a problem, maybe we could push back on you. And so we'll have CNN be the pushback. This is arguments from Jasmine Crockett. Yesterday, I told you she was correct that the police do not prevent crime. They can deter it, but they cannot prevent it. Today, she's making an older argument. This is from a much older show. This is in the first 100 days of Donald Trump's presidency. And she goes to the obvious thing that they all do, which is that it must be racism. It must be racism if you notice that there are some problems in this country at a national level.
And if you really want to know who the criminals are in this country, you can Google it. You don't have to trust me. But the people that commit 80% of the most violent crimes in this country are white supremacists. Yet for whatever reason, they sit and they serve at the pleasure of the president. They are the ones that were there on January 6th, tearing our democracy down physically. And now we have them tearing us down right here from within.
I would like to see a study that considers the nail length, this new sort of thing. There's always been women who have had longer nails of various lengths, and I don't know what the lure is. Men, I don't think it's for us. Maybe you guys can tell me in a comment below. Men, are there any of you that are like, a woman with extra long nails is particularly attractive to me? That's what I'm looking for in a mate, in a partner. Someone, I guess it shows that you're unable to do anything manual or physical labor, that you can't even wipe your own butt. I guess that's what it shows, that you are so privileged that you're unable to do anything with your hands. You've incapacitated your own fingers from the reasons that you have them, and the reason that God created your hands the way they did. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's just like it's a big flex for money. But I feel like there's probably a really interesting psychological correlation study between like detachment from reality that other people live in and the length of the nails that you put on and your ability to do any work. We should get that study done. I would like to see it. I would like to see the results. In any case, CNN is a very good, look, they like to present themselves the most trusted name in news. They want to be in the middle, allegedly. Like, I don't think anyone honest believes that. There was probably a time when they were closer to the middle. I remember that time. I remember watching the first shots of the first Iraq war on CNN. And it was a groundbreaking thing they could do. They brought, infrared cameras and night vision, and they went out into war zones and they showed the first Scud missiles flying and the Patriot missile intercepts and the tracers flying through the sky and all the wild stuff that happened, with Bush 1.0. And they were the most trusted name in news because they were constantly on it and they sent people everywhere. And you go, amazing. And now they've got people like a sitting congresswoman and this podcast host who are making the same argument in 2025. In my lifetime, at 43 years old, I can pretty honestly say that I lived in a significantly post-racial America. And I think all of you did too. There's a reason why a lot of us think that maybe peak U.S. culture, even though we lost a lot of the institutions of the Republic 100 years ago or 120 years ago, a lot of those things may have happened. But when it came to like peak America culture, where we thought we were the good guys, we had the maximum amount of freedoms, we had all these different opportunities, there was huge amounts of hopefulness, especially on the end of the Cold War, and everybody looked around. It was essentially a post-racial America, and that was like at the end of the 90s. And it was about that time when people started looking around and going like, wait a minute, what have all these people in these established positions been doing with all of our money? What have they been doing with the power that they've had as we were focused on external enemies or serving the nation or building up our own individual wealth or raising good kids or whatever it was that people did in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, where they were trying to live, their freest and best lives. And in the 90s, it kind of peaked out. And then suddenly people went like, holy crap, we're about to have $10 trillion in a federal debt. How is that? By the way, we're coming up on 40 now, and $10 trillion seems quaint. And it was a really big deal at the end of the 1990s. In any case, I don't know how you go from the time that I was a teenager and when I was running through high school where it didn't matter what your skin color was. And I don't remember anyone talking about it because we were beyond that. We had already gotten beyond that for a long time. And the only thing I can really point to is that Barack Obama became president under some sort of auspices of fixing something. And what he did was he reinstituted a racial grievance culture so that you have people like this who make a living talking about crazy stuff. Here's another white supremacy claim from CNN.
It's about making sure that there is white supremacy in this country. And if we're honest, we will say that. It is about making sure we will make sure that people who DEI is really all these cold words. You used to use woke. I asked you to define what woke meant. You couldn't really define it for me. Tell me what it means again.
Woke ideology is taking extreme views of American culture and trying to tear down America from the inside out and go outside of our cultural norms and invade every corporation, university, and other institutions.
What is DEI?
That's incorrect.
Tell me.
That's incorrect, because what you just said there would also be really problematic to my claims. No, that's exactly what it is. The woke thing is just an erosion of all the sort of greatness that we actually had. And again, that greatness probably covered over, which is why I think it's interesting. I talked about the Matrix at the beginning of the program. We did have a lot of sort of living in illusion where people thought things were probably better than they were, but the sense of it was that they were better. And over the last 20-something years, we've seen a massive demographic change in this country. And along with it, as the argument goes, you bring in tens of millions of people that have very different culture because of your guilt, because of all the sort of claims that, white supremacy. How do you alleviate white supremacy? Well, you bring in people who are not white. Well, is it even about skin color? Because I don't think it is. And having served in the military, and many of you have, having served in law enforcement on side by people who have very different skin tones than me. It's not about skin tone. It never has been. It's about culture. It's about people that agree with me at a fundamental level that women and children should be protected. That's a Western idea. They think that they serve God and then man second, that government is not the end goal, that it's supposed to be in God we trust, not in Godverment we trust. Those people sort of act a little differently. They kind of act more like whatever I act like. They think that they have individual sovereignty and agency. They think they're responsible for their own decisions. They think that no one is coming to save them. It's up to us. But also it's up to us to take care of our neighbor and be our brother's keeper if we can be, if we have the ability. Like it turns out, like a lot of the people that I work with, if you share those values, it's irrelevant what color skin you have or what sort of melanin content you have in your skin. It's completely irrelevant. It's about this cultural belief that there is a good and a bad, and moral relativism is not it. That's not acceptable. That there are some things that you ought not to do, that you ought to be punished for it, that if you are outside the bounds of society, regardless of what you look like, you can't be part of ours. So we're going to go out there and police our own. That happens locally. Or you could just make the argument that anybody who has a bad lot in life, it's not their fault. And so we've been told we cannot acknowledge that there are certain true things. Think about this. Yesterday, I said to you that there's not a single black woman that I've ever met that I would want to be my boss. And my wife cringed. I don't blame her because I thought about it afterwards and I went, oh, that sounds like a thing that you would get really yelled at for. But then I went back and thought, I've had one black female boss and she was effing awful. She was absolutely atrocious. She was a staff sergeant and she was a tech sergeant actually in the U.S. Air Force. She was one of the worst bosses I've ever had, only to be beaten out by a blonde-haired white lady who was also my boss, because my add-on to that is I don't want any black women to be my bosses. I don't want any women to be my bosses, period. Because I've had terrible women bosses, and I can't think of any of them that were really, really good. That doesn't mean that they aren't in existence. I just haven't experienced them, and I just don't really need to try that out anymore. I'm good with it. It's really simple. And it makes people cringe. They go, oh my God, can you say that? You can't say that you don't want women to be your boss. Why not? What if that's been the experience that I have? What if everything that I've learned in 25, let's see, I started working my first job, I was probably 15 years old, 14 years old, something like that. I've got almost 30 years of work experience that says doesn't work for me. That's just not the way that I operate. The worst bosses I've had were women. I had a woman who was my boss who was a couple years older than me when I worked at a pool, and I walked off the job because of her, because she walked up to me and talked to me like a toddler. She said, "Kyle, how do we sit in chairs?" I'm like, "What? How do we sit in chairs?" I'm like, "I don't know. We've never sat in a chair together, and I don't really intend to." "No, Kyle, how do we sit in chairs?" It doesn't matter, because my competency at this job is beyond whatever your concern is about me sitting in a chair. I had the pool record for fastest safe backboard for a spinal injury at the bottom of a pool. One man, like coming off the chair from the lifeguard stand, pull somebody out of the bottom on a breath hold, draw them up, flip them over, bring them into a place where they could get rescue breaths, take them and put them onto a backboard with a partner that was on the deck. We did it in like under 90 seconds. No problem. From the time of the emergency happening to be able to pull them out. And she's worried about whether or not I have my knees off the, sitting in one of the loops of metal because it's an uncomfortable chair with no padding. I still remember this. I was 17 or 18 years old at that time. It's like, nope, that sucked. If you recognize that problem, though, if you recognize that there are just some things that you'll just learn and you go, okay, well, these people are not my people, whatever they look like, irrelevant. Their culture is not the same. Their values are not the same. Then you're a real problem. Tucker Carlson can say it. He's worth tens of millions of dollars. And so who else can say it? Can you say it at your job? Are you free to just have an idea that is based on the experiences of 20, 30, 50, 60 years of working? Can you have a thought? How many of you have heard women admonish you? And it's almost always women. I'm sure there's men that do it too. That's not politically correct. I hear my own mother say this because they got indoctrinated with this idea. There are things that we cannot say, even though we all pretty much think they're true. How about if you import a bunch of people that don't have your cultural values, you degrade your culture in this country? I don't like the way that he uses the word white in this particular segment, only because I think that it is a little bit too narrow, but I know what he means by it, and I don't disagree with what he's trying to say. Here's Tucker Carlson going on Piers Morgan talking about the issue in Europe. We have the same problem here right now.
Well, the whole point is to humiliate and degrade the indigenous population of the British Isles, the white population. I mean, that's the whole point. And are they really going to do something about it? What would that be exactly? You'd really have to force a lot of people to go back to their countries of origin, millions of people, and you need to do it really soon. And are they actually willing to do that? I don't know. But these are existential questions that we have been browbeat into ignoring for decades. But the question is, like, is Ireland Ireland? If it's majority non-Irish? Oh, shut up, they're Irish. No, they're actually not Irish. Same with the UK, same with England, Scotland, Wales. Like, it's all changing so fast. Nothing like this has ever happened in all of history, except when, say, the Mongols swept across the steppe and raped everybody. Like, that was true demographic change on this scale. But even that wasn't as profound as what we're seeing in every white country around the world. I would say the West, but Australia and New Zealand also. So, like, what is that? Now, my brain is not big enough to understand what that is. I have a lot of theories about it, but I don't know if they're true. All I know is what the numbers are. And that's real. And no one feels that he can say it. Everyone's like, oh, well, if that were happening in China or India or Malaysia or Senegal, it doesn't matter. You'd be like, what the hell is that? Like, the population's totally different. Look at graduation. Pick, King's College Law School, and look at the graduation picture for the last 30 years. Who's in it? Just, like, let your eyes tell you the truth for once. Like, this is a total change in population. Is it better? Is it worse? Can't have that conversation. Who's pushing this? Does the population want it? The population clearly doesn't want it. There's no polling that's meaningful on the subject. I mean, there's no referendum on it. You don't get to decide. You've got no voice in it, other than you get to go to jail if you complain loudly enough about it. What is this? I think it's the biggest and darkest thing that has happened in the last 1,000 years, for sure. And I think it's leading somewhere really, really bad. It's not happening by accident. That's obvious, because it's only happening in white countries.
I mean, I think that...
Oh, shut up, white supremacist. Well, in fact, I'm not a white supremacist.
Well,
I'm just noticing what the hell's going on.
I think...
I love that Piers Morgan's like, oh boy, what am I getting myself into? And he loves being controversial. Well, I think, and he says, shut up, white supremacists. Because that's the pushback. That's the pushback that's completely acceptable. Let's take a quick pause real quick, and we'll do a Spotify break here. So Spotify ad, if you guys may hear one of those. Again, I say Spotify, but it just means if you're on the audio, you may catch an audio ad right there. So yeah, what runs that? And why can't you talk about it? This is a bigger problem than just population, demographics, movement. What somebody said the other day, the great replacement theory is not a theory anymore. It's just the replacement. It's happening in Britain. There's incredible statistical information that comes out. And in theory, as Tucker just said, the numbers are actually not emotional. They're just numbers. Unless you're trying to slant them a certain way. Now, do you think, are they like the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers where they are fudging them to make one thing look better? They're trying to no, I think they're trying to actually downplay these things. Remember, we can't get an accurate count of how many people illegally came into our country, even over the last 4 years. Forget the last 30. We've seen a complete transformation from people, even on what's called the Democrat side, the left side of the aisle, who theoretically, not long ago, Bill Clinton era, would have told you that people coming here illegally needed to be deported. In fact, Barack Obama said it quite clearly. We have laws. We are a nation. There are rules. This is not Vietnam, right? Like the Big Lebowski argument. You can't just do whatever you want. The border has to mean something, so we deport you. That seems straightforward. So it gets really, really muddled. And all of that stuff, whether, again, the reasons behind it, I don't know how to speculate on it. My wife and I were having these conversations, and it was like, well, who's running this? People want to jump to conclusions. I watched Jesse Kelly say something the other day. It's the communists. The communists have this theory. Communists are like teenagers in an intellectual debate. They're intellectual teenagers. When you have a discussion with someone who legitimately believes that communism is a good idea, they're about as solid as someone who has almost no life experience and everything is paper thin. You can punch holes through it like you can through wet Kleenex. Every single argument holds up to zero scrutiny whatsoever. So it sounds really good. Kind of like when you were 16 years old, when I had my first and second job, and I thought, yeah, I know exactly how the world works. I've got all these great ideas, but I have no experience to test them. And once you test them, you realize, like, I actually don't know anything. I'm a complete moron. Many of you, especially my men out there, know that this is true, not just when you're 14, 15, and 16 and you're mouthing off to your parents, but it continues on until you're in your 20s. So for a lot of us, 25, 26, when the frontal cortex starts developing to the point where we actually can make better decisions, we go like, oh, I was a complete moron for the entirety of the time that I've been standing on this earth. And all of my arguments were dumb. That's why I thought punk rock was really cool and Damn the Man and Save the Empire. And that stuff was really emotionally appealing, but it was dumb. If you're honest with yourself, you know that. And if not, you grow up to be a communist or an anarchist and you think that's an answer. Here's a kind of a sober looking voice. This is Robert Malone. Robert Malone looks like the kind of guy, he looks like the most interesting man in the world if he was not Hispanic, right? The most interesting man in the world, the Dos Equis commercials. He looks like a guy that would have gravitas. And he's saying something that I think is really important here. We haven't talked about the concept of fifth generation warfare in quite a while. We were really big on it during the election season because it was really obvious. Fifth generation warfare is asymmetric, info wars, if you will. He's talking about who's controlling this stuff where it's not really obvious. And so we have all these villains. I've seen all these people call about like the deep state gangsters and all these other people are going to get arrested. We need Fauci in jail. Like, we need Brennan. We need Comey. We need Biden. Like all these people need to be locked up. Why? Who's really pulling the strings? He's asking relevant questions. I think this is actually worth listening to. So I'm going to run this a little bit longer than I might normally. Consider the question, are you even looking at the right bad guy? Or are you getting manipulated as part of the entirety of it? If everything is a psyop, isn't the things that you've come to the conclusion of, isn't that the psyop too? We did a whole thing about the Kansas City Shelter. You guys should go back and look at that episode at some point. I'm going to go review it because I bet you there's some really relevant clips that play out real today. Anyway, here's Robert Malone talking about it.
In true fifth generation warfare, you do not know who your opponent is. Example, who is responsible for, who's the puppet master behind the COVID crisis as we've experienced it? Who is it? Anybody here know? Was it Klaus? No. There's something above Klaus. Was it Biden? Was it Tony Fauci? These are all surrogates, okay? You don't really know who is managing the message that has been propagated on you. That's fifth generation warfare. Over the last 3 years, Western governments, non-governmental organizations, transnational organizations, pharmaceutical industry corporations, media and financial corporations have cooperated via public-private partnerships, which I assert is a euphemism for fascism, to deploy the most massive, globally harmonized psychological and propaganda operation in the history of the world. Okay? Over the last 3 years, you have been subjected to the most massive, harmonized, globally coordinated propaganda campaign in the history of the Western world, full stop. With this campaign, the governments of many Western nation states have turned, okay, this is key, military-grade psychological operations strategies, tactics, technologies, and capabilities developed for modern military combat against their own citizens. These are inconvenient facts.
Right. The first thing he said as he was doing this looks almost like a TED Talk. The first thing he said is that in true fifth-generation warfare, you don't even know who the enemy is. And if you think you do, you've probably been hoodwinked. Who is it? Who does it go to? Is it Israel? Is it the Jews? I hear that all the time. That seems awfully simplistic. Is it a bunch of, individual billionaires that are out there? Is it Bill Gates? Is it George Soros? That seems simplistic. It's the same sort of arguments that people make against the so-called deep state, the administrative state that we argue about here. The administrative state doesn't have a ruler. It doesn't get orders. There's not a text message or a group chat where everybody in the deep state goes out and does one thing. It doesn't happen that way. It's a bunch of people who have been ideologically shaped and refined to do certain things because of their life experiences, because they've been rewarded for these types of behaviors, and they all independently come to the same conclusion. That's how we ended up with this funny little story that Steve Baker covered. If you guys haven't checked out The Blaze, check out my X feed and check the story out. The FBI is still infiltrating Catholic groups in Louisiana, and they are policing speech to the point where they are taking members of a conservative Catholic, a traditionalist Catholic group. They are pulling them out individually and interviewing them and saying, look, you haven't said anything that was over the line yet in this chat group that we weren't invited to because we're part of the federal freaking government. But you're close. The things you're saying are on the line, as though there was a line, as though there was a line that you cannot say certain things to your friends. There's no group chat that tells all the FBI agents, hey, a-holes, today we're going to go after these guys. It's just a bunch of independent, co-aligned interests that work in the same types of organizations. It doesn't have to be the FBI. It could be every single government agency. I said something to a friend the other day, and I said, you work for a garbage organization. And he was like, well, the FBI didn't used to be like this. It used to be better. But obviously, yeah, you think just the FBI is garbage? And then I said, no, you misunderstood what I meant by the word organization. I mean, the entire United States government is a garbage organization because it is full of people that do garbage stuff. Our chat is using the word siloed. Yeah, they're siloed. But they all have the right ideas. They all know what to do. It's like independent terror cells. They don't need to have universal command and control mechanisms. No, you know what the principles are, and then you go out and execute it, the mission as you see fit. Brings me to this story because Robert Malone brought it up. Obviously, Robert Malone was a big voice during the COVID nonsense that has gone on for the last couple of years. I didn't realize that it was still ongoing. Here you now will learn it too, for some of you who have moved on from this. Some of us moved on from it right after we got COVID. Now, we had to deal with the social implications of it. We had to deal with the financial and the economic and the employment-based consequences of COVID. But my COVID experience was done when I survived it the first time. And I used survived in some air quotes here because I got sick for a couple days, like a bunch of other times that I had the flu, and it sucked. And then I was fine. The CDC finds a 4% drop in the U.S. death rate in 2024 from COVID because they're still tracking it. Experts say the decline may be due to COVID. COVID fell out of the top 10 causes of death for the first time since 2020. The ongoing lie and the reason why we don't have any trust in our government is not because they just give us false labor statistics and they tell us that more people got jobs than they did in order to make certain people feel better about the work they did, aka Joe Biden, aka make Donald Trump look worse. What a silly and partisan thing that is. Not only are they doing that, the United States is talking about a death rate that has decreased by 3.8 in 2024 as COVID fell from the top 10 leading causes of death for the first time in 4 years. Did you know that COVID was one of the top 10 leading causes of death in America last year? I did not. I don't think it was ever the top leading cause of death. That's my personal opinion. I just say that anecdotally because I know people that have died from heart attacks. And I know people who have died from strokes, and I know people who have died from the flu, from emphysema, from various different pulmonary conditions, COPD type symptoms. I know people that have died from complications from diabetes and amputations. I know people of all those things. I know people who have died in car accidents. I know people who have died in gunshot wounds. I've held people who have died from gunshot wounds. I've never seen anybody die from COVID. Now, I didn't work in a hospital during the COVID time, so obviously I have a limited data set, but you'd think anecdotally that I would know a neighbor or a member of my family who died specifically because it was COVID specific that ended their life. And maybe I know someone who knows someone, but I personally don't know anyone who did. And that's kind of wild to me. I know people who we believe died from the shots, who's had a nasty and horrific backlash after receiving those injections. And maybe that was COVID. Maybe I just misunderstood it. It's possible. But I'll tell you what, if it was in the top 10 leading causes of death, it stands to reason that of the people that I know in the world, of which I meet and talk to and deal with tons of them, I should know somebody who has died from it. Again, I had friends who worked in emergency rooms and they knew people who died from it. So I'm 2 degrees away at best. The report found that overall deaths fell from 3.09 million in 2023 to 3.07 million in 2024. Additionally, the report showed that the 3 leading causes of death stayed the same for 2023 and 2024. Oh, wait, so there was consistency, and those leading causes of death were heart disease as the leading cause, followed by cancer, and then unintentional injury, also known as traumatic injury. So the top causes stayed the same, but we had some big change. Remember, for a while, COVID was the top cause, and that's pretty freaking wild. One of the top causes of death is not murder in this country. We actually do have that benefit. Homicide, death by another person's hand, is not one of the leading causes of death. But you wouldn't know that based on what you've been seeing on the news, because we are now having this new discussion about race, of which CNN is letting us know that race had nothing to do with it. They're telling us that there's no way for us to be able to solve the problem of human violence. You've heard other people say, now the left is actually saying police don't prevent crime. I agree, they don't. They actually deter it sometimes, which I guess is a subset of prevention. But all we can do is punish people and then lock them up. So there's this discussion right now about something that is not a leading cause of death. It's not the most leading cause of misery, but it is a massive problem with trust, because in the case of heart disease, who's at fault? Maybe you, maybe your genetics, maybe your environment, maybe your financial situation. What about cancer? Same story. Could be environmental, could be the way that you lived your life, could be the things you were exposed to, intentionally or otherwise. Unintentional injury. Oftentimes, it's your fault or someone nearby, but it's not unintentional. Means it wasn't like they didn't go after you. Car accidents, you fell off a cliff, you fought with a lawnmower, you shot tannerite when you were too close, took your head off. I don't know. But murder is specifically something that is a trust issue. It's another human being that is in your society, that our society has either not found to be unsafe yet or has let out because they don't know how to deal with people that are unsafe yet. And so they're wandering around, and then they break the ultimate trust. They take someone else's life. They infringe on your liberty to the point where you no longer ever have liberty again. That's a massive trust break. And here's Van Jones saying that we just don't know how to solve this problem.
We don't know why that man did what he did. We don't know how to deal with people who were hurting in the way this man was hurting. Hurt people hurt people. What happened was horrible. No one mentioned the word race, white, black, or anything except him.
I'm confused that we don't know how to solve a problem. We came up with solutions, of course they were terrible solutions, for all kinds of things that didn't involve other people. And it turns out people are actually really easy to contain. You don't need something microscopically small to stop human beings from coming for you. We can use chain link fences. They won't stop mosquitoes. They won't stop viruses. They won't stop ping pong balls if fired properly. They won't stop poison darts by indigenous tribes. But I'll tell you what, chain link fence, it's not permeable by human body. We figured out how to do that. Somehow we figured out how to stop a virus that didn't stop a virus. This is a fun little thing. This is why we don't have trust in a lot of ways. You're not going to be able to make a recommendation to me because we had guys like Anthony Fauci. And this is a really wild compilation, folks. So if you have never heard things like this, the flip-flop, we all remember it. Have you ever heard it strung together on why we don't trust the medical institutions? Again, what did I say we were going to have problems with? Our media, Van Jones clearly lying about certain things. We do know how to stop those people. You put them in jail forever. You put them in an institution forever. There are mechanisms to make human beings not be able to interact with other human beings. Totally doable. We have financial problems. We've got calculations of statistic problems. We've got public health as a crisis because nobody believes the people that are talking about it. The people that are theoretically in a position of high trust betrayed it. Here's a great example of that. And this is why we are in a trust crisis. This is why I think we are post-trust in America. It's not low trust. As a nation, we are post-trust because they've destroyed our ability to trust them.
This is not rocket science. We know exactly what we can do and what we should be doing. Please wear a mask. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. I often myself wear 2 masks.
There's an email from you concluding I do not recommend that you wear a mask.
Everybody should be wearing a mask when they're outside. People should not be walking around with masks. I wear a mask when I'm outside. You don't need a mask when you're outside. Wear a mask at all times when you're outside. So even if you are vaccinated, you should wear a mask. If you are vaccinated, you do not need to wear a mask.
Dr. Fauci, thank you for your clarity.
If you wear a mask, you can decrease the likelihood of transmitting or acquiring COVID-19 by 50, 60, 70, maybe 80%.
He said masks work at the margins, maybe 10%.
You're a master communicator. Wear a mask all the time, consistently. When you're outside, it's not like I always wear one, always wear a mask. We do not recommend people wearing masks. Children should still wear masks. At least one mask. You don't need to be walking around with a mask. Absolutely. We should have universal wearing of masks. Mandating masks, yes, let's do it. If it doesn't happen nationally, then I think that the mayors and the governors should do it.
Mask mandates did nothing.
Forget the politics. Look at the data.
Mask mandate states fared no better than states without mask mandate.
This is a 10-minute compilation of insanity, and I'm going to put it over at kyleserafin.com. It'll be up on the free post, so if you guys want to just go over there and do it. If you want to share the link to it, because you can't find it other places, I found it over on social media. Useful compilation of just how ridiculous the double talk was. Now remember, the answer to people on the political left, this is the difference between left and right, by the way. It's not, in theory, it actually exists like this. I'm not confident that we actually have that in our political parties, hence I'm post-partisan as well. But if we were going to go over to the left, the answer should be more government restrictions, government control, cede some of your individual liberty and your control over your resources, and a larger group, the U.S. government, federal government, state government, whatever, will come in and solve that problem. The alternative is on the right-hand side where you say maximum liberty, trust in God, trust in your neighbor, act properly, hold your community accountable through societal pressures, things like shame, right? Things like, encouraging virtue, rewarding virtue, and so on, individual and private charity, so on. If you do those things, then you're going to be better off. So the left always, sorry, here, this is my left. I'm on the screen. The left is always going to lean more aggressively towards a governmental solution. You know we're in a bad spot when they say that we can't solve the problem of violence. These are the same people that saw we needed healthcare counselors, we needed all kinds of compassionate releases and no bond. And maybe if we didn't make people broke, then this would work. Here's Chris Cuomo telling you that there's no way to solve the problem of mental illness. Well, how come it's such a new, interesting issue? And how come it was solved previously? Yeah, imperfectly, but we had way better control of this prior to Ronald Reagan shutting down the institutions. There was a mechanism for it. People just thought it was sort of distasteful. And they got conservatives to go along with it because conservatives say, oh, well, you know what? More government is bad. Generally speaking, yes. Except maybe in this case.
It's posturing that we can punish our way out of this. We can't. The desperate and homeless, the unmedicated and untreated, all those who refuse care or are uncared for and sometimes violent, it's on us for being all about feelings and not fixes. In fact, here is what no one is saying. You want to know the truth? We broke the system that kept this from happening, and we broke it on purpose. Do the homework. I'll do it for you. I did it for you. Since the 1960s, we have been doing less and less to deal with those who can't control themselves. shifting responsibility to states, closing large mental institutions that were underperforming instead of improving them, cutting funding, not forcing or enforcing insurers to cover what is needed. And you know who did the most to create the least care for the mentally ill? The same party now demanding action. President Reagan made moves to shut facilities and force patients out by cutting federal spending in legendary ways, reducing mental health to a memory. Hundreds of millions of dollars in the 80s. So more mentally ill people ended up on the streets and in communities and committing crimes.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's a partial truth, which is how you get the best answer. That's how you get to blame somebody like Ronald Reagan. Now, look, Ronald Reagan was far from perfect. And you go back and look at his legacy. Once you get away from sort of the luster of his presidency, like he was terrible about guns for people who actually care about those sort of things. I'm one of them. And, you know, this is not a good legacy. But the answer that you shouldn't have federally funded mental health care or federally funded, you know, institutions, that makes perfect sense to me. That is a conservative position. So he's not outside of the ring. The difference is it's supposed to be picked up by the local communities. And the sad thing is that you have this ridiculous idea that if the federal government doesn't do it, then it can't be done. That is something that the left makes an argument about regularly. I don't trust their argument. It doesn't need to be federal. It should be local. It should be community. It should be churches. The thing that made me realize that we don't have an answer and we can't punish our way out of it, there's this question that the CNN panelists were talking about. I wonder if I have that clip too. Good, I don't, because I actually didn't want to hear it again. The argument is like, well, how do we spot these people? We used to be able to do that because they were in your family. And when you had somebody in your family, if you had the village idiot, or if you had, you know, the family's crazy person, the black sheep who did things that were dangerous and illogical, that was always out there, you know, causing problems, we knew who they were because we were around them. We didn't send them off into an urban area to go live on the streets. We didn't let them go move into some urban area on their own when they couldn't take care of themselves and then just think society will take care of them. Our government is charged with this problem. They were our problem because they're our family member. So breaking up families and having less generational family support is actually the craziest part of it. That's how you end up with that problem. That's how it didn't exist in the same ways. There've always been people who were mentally ill. I'm sure of it. There've always been people that were dangerously mentally ill. But how did they get mitigated previously? The people closest to them spotted it earlier. You think you don't know in your house if somebody's crazy? If my wife starts telling me that the toaster is giving her secret messages and that she's going to have to drown the kids in the bathtub, we got a real problem here. I'm not going to be leaving her alone with my kids, right? If you have a brother growing up that's like that, and then your answer is, well, tough shit, man. You're on your own. Society will take care of you because I don't have the bandwidth. That's not the answer. And it doesn't have to be government, it turns out. It's just you. Last night I was talking to people about that moment that you have if you're looking around on a bus and something bad happened to somebody, if you're looking around on the street and somebody's being, you know, attacked or threatened, and you're thinking, God, should I do something? I'm going to give you a little pro tip here, because I've had that moment in my life. I've had that moment when I worked in government. I've had that moment when I was just standing in my life on the street, just as a guy. The fact of the matter is if you hear that little voice asking, hey, should I do something right now? God's giving you the hint. I've done an entire speech. I was out in Idaho and I had talked about it. Isaiah 6:8. It's like, here I am. I'm available for tasking. What does that voice sound like, though? Is it like, Kyle, go out there and do the thing. Please step up. It's your turn. You're being called. No, it's like, should I do this? Who said that? It's time to act. Yeah, you have a responsibility to people in your family. You have a responsibility to strangers that are your neighbors that you meet. Theoretically, we should all do that. Anyway, why do we not trust the voices that we used to cede authority to? We used to cede agency to authorities, people who had money and power and influence and capabilities to do all kinds of stuff. And we're like, well, they know what the right thing is, right? They're doing the right thing for us. What about this guy? Why did we hear this message? And the message ended up being loud and clear for a lot of us. You have turned away from me. You've put your trust and your faith in the wrong things. And so I will reveal them to you as being liars and frauds right in your own eyes. Here's a compilation that is truly, I'm sure we've seen things like this before. this was a wake-up call for many of us. Because previously, maybe we weren't paying attention and we didn't get it yelled at. As we come into what we're in September right now, which means we must be entering into a winter of serious illness and death, right? Isn't that what we heard under the Biden administration for all of us that didn't get shots? Here we are still alive. How did that happen? Maybe because everything they said was a lie and it was obvious to it. And that was a gift in its own way. It woke a lot of people up, but it did move us away from trust. Because how can you trust anybody that was in this compilation?
21, we should be able to manufacture a lot of vaccines, and that vaccine, key goal is to stop the transmission, to get the immunity levels up so that you get almost no infection going on whatsoever. Everyone who takes the vaccine is not just protecting themselves, but reducing their transmission to other people and allowing society to get back to normal.
We can kind of almost see the end. We're vaccinating so very fast. Our data from the CDC today suggests, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick.
Now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person. A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus does not infect them. The virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else. It cannot use a vaccinated person as a host to go get more people. That means the vaccines will get us to the end of this.
Essentially, vaccines block you from getting and giving the virus.
Fully vaccinated people are at a very, very low risk of getting COVID-19. Therefore, if you've been fully vaccinated, you no longer need to wear a mask.
When people are vaccinated, they can feel safe that they are not going to get infected. We have all the vaccines we need. We just need our people to take it. A, for their own protection, for the protection of their family, but also to break the chain of transmission. You want to be a dead end to the virus. So when the virus gets to you, you stop it. You don't allow it to use you as the stepping stone to the next person. I think given the country as a whole, the fact that we have now about 50% of adults fully vaccinated and about 62% of adults having received at least one dose, as a nation, I feel fairly certain you're not going to see the kind of surges we've seen in the past.
How bad is that? New York Times today, front page, vaccines in the CDC, chaos exposed tension between Kennedy and Trump. Is that what it exposed? Or are these hearings exposing that there is an entire industry of people that are dead set on lying to you about information? Because if they were just being reporters of statistics, then people would be able to make good decisions. I don't think it shows anything of the sort. But here's the New York Times. While there's no evidence of a break, listen to me, I swear to God, they just said this. CDC and vaccine chaos exposed tensions between Trump and Kennedy, talking about RFK Jr. and Donald Trump. The next line in their subheadline is, while there's no evidence of a break between them, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy has caused consternation among President Donald Trump and his aides. There's no evidence, but we are going to make a claim. That's the fundamental basis of a post-trust. They're not even hiding it. They're saying, listen, what we're saying is our opinion based on no evidence because we feel that's true. And by the way, we have a bunch of other things we'd like to push on you. HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has faced a tricky moment on Tuesday when he released a report outlining Donald Trump's Make America Healthy Again strategy. Asked by a reporter if he agreed with Mr. Trump's comment that vaccines work, pure and simple, Mr. Kennedy, a famous vaccine skeptic, at first ducked the question and he said, I agree with that. Finally, Trump's top domestic policy advisor who presided over the event banged his gavel, bringing questions to a close. It was an awkward scene, capped with a particularly fraught 2 weeks for the president and his celebrity health secretary. There's no evidence that Mr. Trump is going to break with Mr. Kennedy, but the secretary has lately caused consternation among his aides. Got it. So it's just our feelings. Nothing to do with what actually happened. It's nothing to do with reality. Let's see if we can drive a wedge between this. This is Bernie Sanders. He's standing at a podium that says vaccines work, and we are now going to have a war on truth and on science and on other things that we also think are very good. And we are going to do it by doing lies for years and years and then ignoring the lies.
Let me be as clear as I can be. We are now witnessing a full-blown war on science, on public health, and on truth itself. That is what we are confronting right now. At this unprecedented moment in American history, it is important to share the facts as clearly as we can. So I will take this opportunity to make a very simple point. Can't be simpler. Vaccines work, period.
And I will be surrounded by people who are wearing white lab coats even though they are not in a lab because that makes them look very medical-like. That's what we will do. NIH whistleblower details the clash over childhood vaccines with the Trump administration. We became inconvenient, says this whistleblower. Not ironically using the term. No air quotes around the word whistleblower, by the way. This NIH whistleblower. This is a story from CBS News. A former top National Institutes of Health leader who says she was removed from her positions after a dispute with the Trump administration officials details internal clashes at the elite medical research agency on Monday and warned of an agenda that poses a, quote, substantial and specific danger to public health and safety. By the way, those are words from the statute to be listed as a whistleblower. So she's actually quoting the statute and claiming whistleblower status. At least she's doing it in a clever way. Dr. Janine Marazzo described in an exclusive interview with CBS News that she was being silenced when she and her colleagues tried to oppose efforts pushed by HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to cancel vaccine research and clinical trials. Ultimately, we were disregarded, she said. We became inconvenient. She filed a whistleblower complaint with the U.S. Office of Special Counsel. Good luck with that, honey. Last week, alleging illegal retaliation. She was placed on leave and reassigned in April. She's been in the role since August of 2023, and she succeeded Anthony Fauci. She was the replacement for Anthony Fauci, who served as the NIAID director for nearly 4 decades, as well as the chief medical advisor to former President Joe Biden. It was not unexpected, she said, of her removal, but it was still a body blow. Yeah, I agree. Being a whistleblower sucks. Going out and speaking out against your agency sucks. What about when your agency is fully comfortable with lying? This is not NIH. This is a discussion of the CDC. This was a hearing. This is a man named Toby Rogers. He's a PhD in something I'll have to look up right now. And he's talking to Ron Johnson, who led this hearing about vaccines and efficacy and sort of the damning information that some of us had access to really early on. How did we know? How did we know not to trust people like this lady who's worried about becoming inconvenient, but apparently also doesn't want to give information that's not partisan and just letting people make good decisions?
Dr. Rogers, you have something. Dr. Scott, I think you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I want to add to this debate. So I watched every single meeting of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices and the Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee in 2021, 2022, and 2023, when all these COVID shots were being authorized for use in this country. And after a while, the CDC's own research showed that the protection from the vaccine, if any, was between months 2 and 6. And by 6 months, it showed negative efficacy. So I'm watching the hearings on my, computer screen at home. I'm yelling at the screen. The COVID shots have negative efficacy after 6 months. Tell me how a shot with negative efficacy is saving lives and it has the worst side effect profile of any vaccine in human history. So how exactly is a vaccine with the worst side effects and negative efficacy saving lives? That's a preposterous claim. What ended the COVID pandemic was the Omicron variant that was more transmissible but less lethal. The vaccine, how many people it helped? I think it's an open debate. It could be a net negative.
Well, maybe we can look at the clinical trial data in which 21 people died in the vaccinated group and 17 died in the placebo group.
I do want to, again, I believe the first study that came out of showing negative efficacy came out of Denmark. But Dr. Scott, you said you wanted to say something.
So is everything better because we did a hearing? Does it change anything? Doesn't seem like it.
I've come to realize that those hearings are performative. They're theater. And You know, they're not the kind of debate or open conversation that democracy would give us at its ideal. And then all of those senators are taking hundreds of thousands of dollars, including, in some cases, millions of dollars from the pharmaceutical industry. So they don't want to hear the answers to the questions that they ask me.
There you go. It's scripted. Everybody's trying to get their soundbite. You got the people on the left. They're telling you that there's a whistleblower and we're inconvenient and they don't care about facts and there's chaos, even though we can't prove any chaos and nobody sees any chaos. There's no evidence of chaos, but there is chaos because we believe there's chaos. And the other side's like, hey, there's some data we think is really important, but we don't have access to all of it. And so we'd really like to be able to discuss it. Can we have that conversation? Is that reasonable? RFK Jr. went out and had a little discussion about one of the things that has changed that apparently is really, really bad, which Americans in general should actually be excited about. Less propaganda. How many of you guys have seen, to the point where we can make a joke about it, pharmaceutical advertisements in your life? That's relatively new as far as I can tell. And the reason is because there was a change in the ruling. This is just an edict that was put out by the federal government. What the FDA had to say and what the FCC required them to do. They didn't have to list all the side effects. And if they did, it would be so long that people might be like, oh, crap, maybe I don't want to take this. Isn't more truth the answer? It would be in a high trust society if we could actually believe that there's some reason to believe what we're seeing on TV. People still believe it, but not people who are in the post-trust part of it. Not people who have been red-pilled to the point where they open their eyes up and go, no, you're freaking liars. We know you're liars. And by the way, how is it that something that is supposed to help my depression also has a side effect of suicidality and homicidal ideations? That doesn't seem like it's really helping me. I mean, they're comical. Apparently, they're going to change some of these rules. I don't think it's a fix, but I think it's a start. It's at least acknowledging that this problem is that there's a big, big trust gap.
The president just signed an executive order making some news here when it comes to pharmaceutical ads.
The president just signed an executive order that's an historic change in the way that pharmaceutical advertising is done on television. And the order basically reinstates or gives us now the opportunity to reinstate the 1997 rules. Prior to 1997, pharmaceutical advertisers were required to put all the side effects on their ads. Many of them didn't advertise because it lengthened because of what it did to the length of the advertising. And that the removal of that requirement in 1997, FDA changed the rule to allow them to report the side effects on a website or on a telephone. And they only had to report a few of them on television. And that triggered a proliferation of these ads. There's only 2 countries in the world that allowed direct-to-consumer advertising by pharmaceutical companies on television. We're one of those countries. New Zealand is the other. It's had a disastrous impact on human health, on people's relationships with their doctors, and really on the entire gestalt where Americans are led to believe that there's a pill for every ill, and that you don't have to exercise, you don't have to pay attention to your diet. Whatever goes wrong with you, you can fix with a drug.
That seems like the end goal, which is that if you just cede your authority, if you cede your agency, if you no longer take any responsibility for the things, that something will take care of it for you. There's a doctor out there who knows the things. We've actually seen that argument made by Stephen Colbert in the last couple days on TV. You're a doctor. You're supposed to tell me what to do. I'm supposed to lie about whether or not I did it. That was his joke. Hilarious. Cede your agency. Let somebody else tell you how to handle your business. Don't worry about taking responsibility. And definitely don't take responsibility for somebody else. That would involve like community. Meanwhile, you have the same exact people saying that community should raise your kids, that it takes a village, and so on and so forth. This is why I think the quote-unquote communist and even the leftist ideology in general, it is teenage, it is paper-thin logic that doesn't even stand up to scrutiny against itself. Like at the first level, the iterations don't play. The only sort of coherent ideologies are that man's not in charge. If you believe that God actually runs things, then you don't actually have to despair. You don't have to win here on earth. That's really hard to believe. It's really hard to live as though that were the case. But that's what Christians are called to do. That's what Western civilization is based on. And all of it is based on this fundamental belief that the future is worth, protecting, and that your time is to go forth and multiply. And everything on the left goes against that. It says you should be infertile. You should try to worship the planet. You should not have babies. You should not raise them. Somebody else should. You shouldn't have values. that actually prioritize good and evil and say that this is what is right and this is what is wrong, this moral relativistic nonsense, nihilistic. And then meanwhile, our government's going to investigate you if you have nihilistic ideas. And they're going to investigate you if you happen to be too Catholic, if you're too Christian, if you're too conservative or too fundamentalist. If you're a radical traditionalist who actually believes that things actually worked for a while and we were getting better at it as technology came on. And so all that had to do was break this. This trust issue is not going away, but the answer is actually more local than it is to be more national in focus. And the funniest thing about it is, I guess at the end of the day, it actually is the biggest system is never going to be federal government. It's always God above, which makes it even harder because the federal government wants to quantify it. You can't really lie about the number of miracles that have happened because how can they quantify it? You can't number the way that people worship and experience things in their own life. So that takes the trust category directly away from the people that would like to be able to go out there and have an artificial means of holding it. All right, that's the program today. I actually have a little bit of a Bill Maher comedy routine at the end. I think some common sense goes in. Even people on the left, there's plenty of people on the left that are not completely absurd. Most of them tend to be a little bit older, it turns out. The younger ones don't get it. Before we get to the palate cleanse, if you're watching over on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'd appreciate it if you did. Make sure you guys have hit the like button wherever you're at. If you're over on Rumble, if you're on YouTube, if you're watching on X, hit the like, hit the heart, whatever it looks like over there. And if you want to join us for the community end of this thing, it's at locals. It's KyleSerafin.com. If you want to share it with a friend, you could do it on Spotify, which is the easiest and I think probably the best platform now. It's KyleSerafinShow.com. If you've never used Spotify, I'm actually a big fan of it. I've been kind of advocating for them because they crush it. They give you all the options: video, audio, skipping around, speed. It costs you nothing. Costs nothing to be part of our program over there. You can just simply follow on, and more people tend to watch it. So we get really good data out of it. That's the upside for me. I get good data, which means we can market the program. All right, we appreciate all of you guys for watching. Let's do something fun. How about Bill Maher talking about a Supreme Court decision and discussions of something that shouldn't even be a question? Imagine how low trust you have to be where we're going to negotiate whether or not you're a man or a woman, and we think that we should be instructing little baby children with insanity.
Trans in school. The Supreme Court is hearing about the case in Maryland about a couple of religious people. It's really a religious-based case. They do not want trans books that teach kids that some people are trans in the schools. And here's Justice Amy Coney Barrett. She's quoting from one of the books. When we're born, people make a guess about our gender and label us boy or a girl based on our body parts. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. No, I think that's bullshit, okay? No, they're almost always right. If you have a dick, you're almost always a boy. I think it's okay to teach kids, there's a default setting for humans, and if you're not part of that default setting, it doesn't make you a worse person. These things happen. I mean, it's on the right. They don't even believe that trans is a thing. It is a thing. But it's not a thing that happens like this, where, well, we don't know, jump ball, every baby is a chicken. And even Elena Kagan, one of the most liberal judges, said, I suspect there are a lot of non-religious parents who also weren't all that thrilled about this. This is the kind of issue, it's one of those 80-20 issues that the Democrats have been on the wrong side of.
It's not 80-20. It's like 98-2. And if you're part of the 2%, it used to be that your family would help you. And they would help make sure that you understand that the toaster's not giving you special messages and that your penis doesn't mean you're supposed to flip it inside out and try to pretend to be a girl. It's just like we used to do that. Anyway, here's the answer.
So let's bring religion back. Let's bring God back into our lives. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Great honor.
So simple. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. God bless you. Thanks for listening. And I look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow. Who knows what the wild times will bring.
Thanks for listening to The Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.